Our first speaker tonight is the veteran Jim Sims. Jim writes in his introduction, how many of you consider yourselves to be powerful? You're Toastmasters, members of the oldest and most prestigious club. You have to be powerful to have stayed the course through 2 years of the pandemic. Jim has been a Toastmaster since 1997. Along the way, he has discovered the fact that embracing Toastmasters helps individuals become powerful presenters and purposeful leaders. Captain Charlie Plum, an F-4 Phantom pilot, used his 2,103 days as prisoner of war in Vietnam to reach unimagined heights after he was freed from the Hanoi Hilton. Some of the areas I am working on, Jim says, are swaying, making sure gestures are consistent and aren't overdone, that they fit in with the words. Please help us welcome Mr. Jim Sims.
I didn't know you were going to let out the secret of what I'm working on. I thought that was just between you and I. But I reiterate that question. How many of you consider yourselves to be powerful? Raise your hand. Pretty good turnout. Oh, 2 hands raised. Excellent. Really, it should be 100% of the hands raised because we're Toastmasters. But yet, isn't it something that we often do? We diminish our talents. Other people maybe tell us how powerful we are, how we connect with others, whereas maybe we shy away from self-praise and we're not necessarily patting ourselves on the back about all of our achievements. There's a Hindu legend, and I've shared it before, that might put a little focus on this issue. And the legend is that at one time, all men were like gods. And the great god Brahma decided to, and man misused it. So the great god Brahma decided to remove the godhead from man forever. Had to come up with a plan, where are we going to hide it so that man doesn't find it again. So we got together a group of lesser gods to come up with that plan. And the first god suggested burying it in the deepest part of the earth. And the god Brahma realized that men would be looking for precious metals like gold and silver, and they might just stumble upon it. So the second god suggested, let's put it in the deepest part of the ocean. It's 5 miles, 6 miles down. And maybe envisioning the world of Jacques Cousteau, the great god Brahma said, no, that also is not going to work. They're running out of ideas. And the third god said, let's put it on the highest mountaintop. And the god Brahma thought of that for a while, and then realized that man would be climbing every mountain, and so dismissed that. And then the god Ganesha, the god of wisdom, whispered into Brahma's ear. A smile came across Brahma's face, and he knowingly said, yes, that's where we'll put it. We'll put it inside of man himself. He'll never think to look there. And ever since, men have been climbing, digging, searching for that power within. And I would say that some of us, or most of us, have found that power here at Tampa Toastmasters. It is a power that allows us to connect with others. "8 foot by 8 foot was the dimensions of the cell of Captain Charlie Plum. Captain Charlie Plum was a U.S. Navy graduate, U.S. Naval Academy. He was a fighter pilot. He flew off the Kitty Hawk. He had flown 74 missions. Ironically, the 75th mission, you go home. And 5 days after the 74th mission, he would have gone home. But on that 75th mission over Hanoi, he and his co-pilot in their F-4 Phantom were shot down. He was captured, tortured, and imprisoned in that cell at the Hanoi Hilton. And it was on November 20th, 1970, that at the Santé prison, 200 guards, Hanoi guards, were killed by the United States Air Force and Special Forces, who descended on that prison, and they opened the cells and they escaped on helicopters. Unfortunately, 4 months before, the prisoners of war who were at that prison had been removed. 2 men, Commander Rutledge and Commander Jenkins, for 4 years That's the only way they communicated, was tapping on the walls. And what happened is, after that attack on the Sante prison, the North Vietnamese became concerned about the Americans' ability to reach out and to try to free the POWs. They started to treat them a little bit more humanely. In fact, they were able to exercise, they were able to gather in groups, and they even found a Toastmaster club, because one of those two commanders had been in Toastmasters in the States. And John, you'll even like this. They even had an R counter at the Toastmaster Club at the Hanoi Hilton. And what happened is Charlie Plum became a motivational speaker. He's delivered to over 5,000 audiences. And in his book, chapter 16 of his book about excellence, he spoke about being in a restaurant in Kansas City, looking at a table, maybe 2 or 3 tables away. And there was a gentleman staring back at him. And Charlie didn't recognize him. And that gentleman walked over to him. He said, "You're Charlie Plum. You flew off the Kitty Hawk. You're a fighter pilot. You're a Top Gun. You flew over Vietnam. You were shot down, and you were imprisoned for 2,103 days." And motivational speaker, he almost was speechless. He said, "How do you know that? How do you know all of that?" He said, "Because I packed your parachute." And so Charlie said to him, he said, "Let me ask you this. Do you keep track of all the parachutes you pack?" And the U.S. Navy seaman said, "No, it's just the willingness and the ability to serve. That's what brings me joy. That gives me satisfaction." Charlie couldn't sleep at all that night. He was pacing back and forth, and he realized here he was, a Top Gun, a fighter pilot on the deck of the Kitty Hawk. He could have passed this man 5, 6, 7, 10 times and not even recognized him. This guy was folding parachutes in the depths of the ship. And yet he said, when it came time for that parachute to work, fortunately, that man had packed his parachute pretty good. 13 out of the 16 folds opened up when he descended from that shot down plane. And so Charlie Plum said, that is the question. Who relies on you for strength? Who did you pack their parachute for? And even more importantly, who packs your parachute that you rely on them to uplift you? And that is really, really a very, very powerful message. And that's where we gather strength. At the end of the Vietnam War, 10,000 North Vietnamese prisoners were exchanged for 591 U.S. POWs. And what's interesting is a lot of the families were even warned, don't expect your heroes to come home in one piece. And yet 36% of the people who served in Vietnam had PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Only 4% of the POWs had post-traumatic stress disorder. In fact, they started to call it post-traumatic growth. And they also excelled in many other ways. Of those 591 men, 17 became generals, 7 became admirals, 2 became United States senators, including John McCain, who was the fighter trainer for Charlie Plum. And they made a difference in their lives. They faced up to those challenges. So the challenge is, can we become like Charlie Plum, touching, inspiring, and memorable? Will your next speech reach out to others in Toastmasters? Will it inspire someone else, as I've been inspired reading about Charlie Plum's story? Will you make a powerful difference in the lives of others? Whose parachutes will you pack?
Our first speaker will be evaluated by none other than Tracey Shadday. She will be evaluating Jim Sims. Tracey.
Well, there is a reason that you have that mentor pin on your lapel, and it's very obvious the experiences you have had since 1997, and actually gives me so much hope. Could I attain that same mastery of the English language as you have? You put together a well-organized speech. I felt like it was 2 stories in one. The first was the mythology, and then the second was on Charles Plum, with the idea that you kind of provided a context for us to understand power and are we powerful by that mythology story. You dressed to the nines. I just want to say that you great. You were very engaging by the way you began and ended your speech by asking a question. How many of you feel you're powerful? After that first question, then you launched our attention and engagement because you explained why many of us don't feel powerful. And immediately you grabbed my attention. Your gestures were perfect. They were useful. You didn't overdo it. When you did the pacing and then the knocking, for me, I disconnected attention a little bit, not being able to interpret what that was. And maybe it's because it lasted a little too long with the pacing especially, but the knocking, I was starting to gather why you were doing that. The question is for all of us, who packs your parachute? That will be a question I take with me from the speech. Your ability to remember numbers, percentages and dates amazed me. Your volume, your eye contact was effective. I will say that there were times that I thought you were in your head. And it was like you looked through us. When you looked at me, when you looked at Suhas and Marianne, and I'm sure others here in the room, like there's a warmth with that eye contact. So I would just say you're probably trying to remember what you're saying. I'm just guessing that. Sometimes when you smiled, it was another warm moment when you weren't so mechanical, but you were more of a person to really listen to. And I think that if there's just one thing to say, it's just relax a little bit more and get out of your head. It was a memorable speech. And thank you very much. It's something I'm going to take with me.